Welcome to what we may or may not call Lemongrass Roots. Our fearless leader, Eamon, your typical host, has abandoned us. So you're stuck with myself and Chris. I am Brian Dennett. Some of you may remember me from prior episodes. I am the BTP Practice Lead at Lemongrass and also helping to explore and unpack the ways in which our AI specific practice are developing. And we have with us Chris. Chris, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hey everybody, I'm Chris Beard. I work in our solutions team, which means I get to go and speak to all our customers about the challenges they're facing, the successes and what they've overcome, and hear what's going on in the market. It's really good fun.
Yeah, so we were asked to do a bit of a recap on Sapphire. Chris, you were at Madrid. I was at both Orlando and Madrid. We had the opportunity to meet many of our customers. To anyone listening that we didn't get a chance to meet, hate that we missed you. Please do reach out. Happy to connect and talk in more details about what we discussed today and the announcements, what's going on with SAP in general. And so with that, Chris, any specific top of mind headline that you want to start with as we talk about what Sapphire was really all about this year?
I mean, wow, Brian, what an exciting Sapphire. Hey, what an exciting moment in IT and in SAP specifically. I think, look, the quote from Christian was great, right? The most consequential announcement in SAP's history, not a roadmap, but capabilities available now, right? And I think it really chimes with what I'm hearing customers say. They want agentic solutions and they want them now. They don't care whether they're on ECC or RISE or S4. And I think we see SAP softening to that view and finding a way to get values to customers right away, as well as obviously having that roadmap of agents and solutions as they move through their transformation roadmap. So yeah, for me, look, AI has become really useful in like the last year, and it's progressively becoming more and more useful, both inside ERP platforms and outside. And I think we saw SAP really start to catch up with that message more widely and find a way to lower the barrier to entry. I don't know if that was the same vibe you got as to what it was all about. How did you feel it came across, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. The big messaging was the autonomous enterprise vision that SAP has put forth, and the AI hype cycle that we are all in. I think everyone is acutely aware of that at this point. I think the AI fatigue grows by the day, but I do think what you said is true. I think there was a real tipping point towards the end of last year where the nature of some of these tools, it's really kind of crossed a threshold in terms of its usefulness, in terms of the pace that it's really introducing into how software gets developed. And I think SAP has been on this trajectory for quite some time in terms of how they're going to show up with AI. And, I think they were a bit more deliberate over the last couple of years. The responsible AI messaging, I think, was reasonable, was appropriate at the time, given where the technology was at. And I think with this tipping points that we've crossed, I do think the vision they're showing now around this assistant agent kind of approach to automating everything, this idea of Joule as an engagement layer and really challenging what enterprise software should look like, how you engage with specific solutions, how you execute work. I think SAP is on the right path there. So I think broad stroke from everyone that I spoke to, from what I saw, from what I've read, I think everyone appreciates the vision that SAP has put forth in terms of the autonomous enterprise. I think the details are what's going to matter now. Like, are they going to be able to execute? What does it look like for customers in terms of like what's actually going to get into their hands and win? And on that subject, it seems like a lot of stuff is right around the corner. Q3 is when a lot of these things are going to become available to customers. So the pace that SAP is going at, I would say, is significantly faster than we've seen historically. And so kudos to SAP for that. But I think, again, it really just gets down to execution, gets down to details. So like one of the big things that I think is a exciting prospect is the intent-based development solution. I don't know if you had a chance to go into the agent lab, and if you did, maybe you want to talk a bit about your thoughts on that whole Joule Studio 2.0 piece of what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I did get a chance to go into the lab and type my intent, and I tailored the prompt they suggested I put in to see how I could play with it and try and break the solution, which I think what all us nerds do the moment we get our hands on new technology. Hey, and look, it was quite interesting and good. It's like vibe coding SAP solutions, right? But in an environment that fits for their new agentic outcomes. And I also thought it was interesting how SAP were really pushing the message about extending their agentic frameworks and the 100 million partner fund they've put up for new agent models and for finding use cases. They really seem to be reaching out to the ecosystem to fill in the gaps and to accelerate the delivery of solutions to customers. In a way, it feels like SAP are expecting agentic solutions to be the future of how SAP gets customized and delivered. So BTP developments have been in vogue with Clean Core for a while, with side-by-side extensibility where possible, and it feels like agentic solutions are the next layer of that scenario, and obviously the way in which they're developed in BTP will become easier. As you mentioned, AI is a core tenet of software development these days. So.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, I think much of the messaging that we've been putting out as an organization, many of the conversations that we've had with customers, I think are still as relevant as ever. I would say the most common conversation I had with customers at both Sapphires was on the topic of what does this mean right now? What does this mean today? And so, we talk a lot about the different layers of communication for the enterprise moving forward. You've got integration suites, you've got BDC, and then you've got the agent gateway. And so, integration suite kind of represents your typical integration patterns, APIs, events, EDI, all that good stuff. BDC being more the ETL type capabilities, the bulk data movement, and then agent gateway really kind of being the new thing that is coming out. That is really the way that SAP wants to structure and govern the agent-to-agent protocol. And so making sure that that infrastructure is showing up correctly, that you've got an enterprise-wide strategy in terms of how to leverage that infrastructure, like that really is going to be the bedrock upon which this entire agentic strategy shows up. And so from there, where does the intent-based development, SAP's term for vibe-coded solutions, come from? How does that design layer get powered with the graph and all the semantic knowledge that SAP has? And then ultimately, how does that get deployed as individual agents? How do those agents get orchestrated? At what point do an aggregation of agents turn into specific assistants? And then those assistants end up helping to push forward your specific end-to-end processes. I think that's really, if you get into the more nuts and bolts of it, the way that this architecture is showing up. And so technically speaking, not a huge deviation. I guess with that being said, that was maybe the other big announcement from Sapphire is the business AI platform. And this idea that BTP, BDC, AI is now kind of back under one moniker, which I do think makes sense because that kind of is the platform, the underpinning that's this entire autonomous enterprise shows up with. And so, SAP doing typical SAP things in terms of rebranding things that already existed. But the technical architecture, that direction, all I think is still roughly the same as it was prior to Sapphire, the same as it's been for the last year, 2 years, arguably.
Well, yeah, I don't disagree, but I always felt the division between BTP and BDC felt a little artificial, and how there are different teams that are looking after the different products and stuff, because it's a lot quicker and easier to build a powerful agentic solution on data products in BDC. And there is so much power in the BDC platform to be able to build things in BTP that really have an impact. Why why would you like bringing them together just makes sense for me. And what I expect to follow the change in naming convention is maybe we'll see SAP bring those teams closer together internally as well, and maybe then we'll be able to get more power out the platforms together at customers. One of the things I was struck by is I tend to get quite excited about these things. I love listening to SAP and all their new innovation, and I tend to be quite optimistic about it. And I sometimes get customers bring skepticism to me, but that isn't at all what I experienced at this Sapphire. Every customer I spoke to they came with an optimism and an enthusiasm and in many cases an immediate buying intent of how we can help them solve problems, which I've never seen at an event before now in this strength. Like it feels as if customers almost were like, finally, SAP is speaking my language. I can get an ROI out what they're asking me to do now. They're giving me what I want. I feel like for a long time, customers have struggled sometimes to find a business case for S4, or maybe there's a rift between IT and finance for going Rise, and I think Rise makes more sense than it did a little while ago. But this agentic solutions, this focus on AI that can make value, like all of the new agents they're talking about and the assistants in the different areas with the specific use cases and a roadmap, as you say, that's quite aggressive. I saw a lot of enthusiasm from the customers, and I spoke to. I must admit, I didn't attend so many sessions because I was just talking to so many customers the whole time. Hey, so yeah, I got a lot of the community seems to have really welcomed the messaging of the Sapphire.
Yeah. I mean, I think the vision SAP put forth is great. I think it's been well received. It's all going to come down to the details at this point, and what we've already been doing in the market, working with customers. I think again the trajectory really, if you look at it, hasn't changed drastically. It's just a much clearer defined North Star. And I still think that there's some interesting challenges on the horizon in terms of thinking about how to invest in these AI solutions, how to start thinking more agentically. Where does agent versus automation show up? This differentiation between assistant and agent, I think, is an interesting one that we're all going to have to kind of unpack as the details become a bit more well thought out, better documented, better shared by SAP. And then ultimately, I think the engagement layer was one of the things that I found fascinating in terms of what SAP showcased over the last 2 weeks. So the partnership with Vercel, these dynamic UIs where you're engaging with Joule, and then Joule is figuring out all the right things to pull in. A lot of that technology has shown up in pockets across the SAP portfolio over the last couple of years, but this was the first time I think there was a cohesive user experience around what Joule will end up being. And so I think that has some interesting implications in terms of how you think about building solutions moving forward. And that's largely in line with the way that we've been thinking about building things, the way that we've been working with customers and doing co-innovation is how do you think about going narrow in terms of use case, going deep, thinking about the full tech stack, thinking about the integration patterns to allow these things to get stitched together in an overarching orchestration layer. Those are, I think, still the patterns that everyone is trying to feel out, understand how best to deploy against now that we've started to see what the engagement layer looks like. So I think that's new, exciting technology that we all get to wrap our heads around now, is how all these things show up in that engagement layer, how the new capabilities that you customize around, how that ultimately gets picked up by Joule and the assistants.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And also the idea that you can engage with voice, that you can go through Copilot with the A2A. I came to the Microsoft stand and they had this demo where it was all misspelt in Teams, like the person writing it and the spacing was wrong, just like when you talk to one of the LLMs to get something done if you're doing individual work where you don't need to worry too much about how as long as you can get the intent across, you don't need to worry about your grammar too much. And it was very, I found it tickled me pink to see their demo running with that kind of, I don't know how they got it past marketing, but it was nice to see the A2A working and how it's interacting with Joule. So there's lots of ways into SAP now that's more open maybe. And I think they also announced a collaboration with Salesforce, right? So all these big organizations which are seeking to be the front of the AI platform, sometimes they're playing nice together, and you saw SAP open up a little bit, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Openness, I do think, was a bit of a theme, technically speaking, this Sapphire. I think SAP has always been two different organizations. There's been the ERP, LOB kind of process focused organization business, and then there's been SAP, the software company. And I think SAP, the software company, signaled something much more open with, again, the UI technology. If you look at the NAN investment and partnership, I do think they are embracing what is right now kind of the bleeding edge in terms of the right vendors to think about stitching together these AI solutions, kind of supporting the new pace of developments that customers are going to expect with these Gen AI kind of vibe coding, intent-based development type solutions. And so it's been nice and refreshing to see the way that SAP is starting to go on a trajectory of being more open with where the larger ecosystem is going. But I guess I'm sure you had some of these conversations, so I'll ask you the question. The API policy that SAP published right before Sapphire, I know I had a bunch of conversations about that. I'm curious if you had conversations with customers on that topic as well.
Yeah, I did, and I mean, a lot of it remains to be seen. I think, largely speaking, I was able to deliver a somewhat reassuring message that this doesn't mean that everything is shutting down and you can't access it. And we will see more about the policies and processes going forward. And of course, the API coverage isn't complete anyway. But I think what SAP were reacting to was the uh, large scale extraction through undocumented hooks by a number of massive tools. And I think what they've accidentally done is caught many of their customers with legitimate use cases. And so I suspect there'll be a softening. And BTP obviously protects you from a lot of because it shows the correct intent as the way you're interacting with the tool. So I don't know if that's similar to your view, Brian, and the conversations you were having. I mean, I initially got some fear from some customers, but I think maybe it's slightly overblown as to what it will mean in reality.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I had some conversations with SAP. I have to be careful because I've got the different NDAs that SAP likes to staple to me. But the thing that I would say is SAP has started to clarify that API policy. I do think, largely speaking, it is just a reinforcement of calling out the APIs that were already flagged as only for internal use, and ultimately, architecturally, I think as long as you're thinking about those three communication pathways that were enumerated earlier, integration suite, BDC, agent gateway, I think as long as you're lighting those solutions up, you're likely completely in the clear. I think one of the things that still probably needs additional clarity is how SAP intends to manage the rate limits on API calls, because I do think that's part of where the concern is rooted. Is if you have these custom MCP servers that are just hammering SAP in non-deterministic ways, just querying for records haphazardly, the system performance, I think, is something that is a legitimate concern. And this again goes back to SAP's old strategy around responsible AI. So I think there's valid concern there. I still think there's some best practices that likely need to be shaped. But largely speaking, I think SAP's already signaled to everyone that there's not any meaningful departure in terms of API protections, and it's more about just a signal flare being sent up in terms of how are we going to have to think about rate limiting calls from agents moving forward to strike the right balance between functionality and system performance. And so that again is just one of those kind of bleeding edge areas where it will be interesting to see how these architectures shake out, how caching strategies shake out, how context injection happens over time to appropriately support these use cases without degrading system performance. So, fun technical challenges lay ahead.
And look, we've talked about AI, we've talked about integration. We should probably talk a bit about data. And actually, I haven't been able to pick your brains on this one yet. What did you feel about the Dremio acquisition that was, I know it happened before Sapphire, but up in lights when we went into the even in the first partner summit slides, right?
Yeah. So I had some interesting conversations with customers on that one, where I think the two data acquisitions that have happened recently, one being more master data focused, the other one being an organization, Dremio, that's more focused on Apache standards. If you look at it through that lens, it's clearly SAP continuing to invest in data quality is mandatory to get the most out of AI, which we've all been talking about, hearing about for probably the better part of a decade now. If you've been paying attention to the AI, ML, data science trends that have been going on for quite some time. So from that perspective, I don't think it's anything surprising. I think the one thing that is potentially up for interpretation is if you think about the way that BDC functions alongside data lakes, the zero copy replication, the ability for SAP to kind of open up and share data in a more sanctioned, potentially more elegant way. I think that this acquisition largely looked to me like another step towards SAP embracing open standards, really leaning into the various protocols for data sharing, for columnar data stores, for data replication. Like, there's a lot of fun stuff in those Apache standards that Dremio was really leaning into. I did have, I think it was maybe two customers that called out concerns around, is this SAP now trying to double down on a posture of trying to control more of the data stack and potentially enveloping those standards, which I thought was an interesting interpretation. It's not where my head went. And so I was a little surprised to hear those hypotheses come up, especially when you look elsewhere at SAP trending in a direction of being a bit more open with standards. But an interesting conversation nonetheless. And if nothing else, I do think it continues to reinforce how critical the BDC strategy is for SAP, and the way in which SAP is continuing to double down on making sure that there's the right tools for data quality and data ingress and egress to make sure that context can be appropriately populated. Uh, that
Brian, I think I might be losing your mic a little bit there, but yeah, I echo your points about Dremio, and I heard the same thing about customers saying, "Hey, is this them giving up on the partnerships and changing track?" But I agree, it's more about adopting those open standards and moving away from proprietary technology, which I think is really interesting for the partners in that space as well. It feels like that war might almost be over, and we might have coalesced around the Apache standard. One of the things I was really taken by is how quickly SAP intends to release these assistants and these agents in the solution, how many there are across the different process areas, and how they now want the ecosystem to lean in. And I realize in the context of the SAP ecosystem, 100 million isn't necessarily the largest amount of money, but it's not insignificant, right? And I think we'll see a lot of development in that space. And I suspect we'll see agentic solutions where deterministic solutions might have fit the bill, right? There'll be some hype, but there could be some really interesting emergent outcomes. I know a lot of customers were very interested about the month end demos that they were looking at, where they were doing an agentic month end and looking to be able to solve some of the problems that otherwise require people. What I was really interested in, the view for the autonomous enterprise, how much do we think, or how much do we feel from SAP was solved about human in the loop and the accountability problem? Because I didn't hear a lot about this, right? The sort of the vision of you can replace your whole workforce with AI was quite strong, but no one was like, hey, if something goes wrong, who's accountable, or where do humans logically fit into this process? I didn't hear too much of that discussion. I don't know if I missed the relevant event or workshop or keynote, but what was your view on those items?
Yeah, I mean, I still think SAP has largely maintained the strategy of responsible AI. And so if you looked at the UIs, if you looked at the actual process flows, there was still human approvers all over the place. I think the nature of how SAP is trying to build these things out, there is still a focus on more deterministic outcomes. In fact, I think SAP continuing to focus on RPT1, on the structured data LLMs, that I think highlights the fact that SAP continues to go down the path of a strategy that is trying to lean into the structured data, trying to lean into kind of their strength as the system of record, and figure out how to extract the right data. I mean, SAP's entire, graph strategy, I think, also highlights the fact that they are trying to lean into the semantic knowledge that they've already captured and then drive things in a more deterministic way. So I'm not overly concerned about the lack of language there in terms of human in the loop, in terms of determinism, in terms of responsibility, reliability of these solutions, because that's kind of been the backdrop of SAP for years as it relates to AI. But I do think it's a fair call out. And I think the pace at which SAP is moving now, I think at the end of the day, customers still need it to be a stable foundation that they build on top of and build around. And so that is something where I think we all have to be mindful of it and try and strike a balance in terms of where these solutions land, what the best practices are, the best architectures, and this is why continuing to kind of go down the golden path, as SAP calls it, in terms of this agentic strategy, in terms of the technical architectures. I think that's why those things are all the more important now. I think, one thing, talk about the assistance stuff, and we should probably wrap this shortly. They did talk about the migration focused assistance. And
Oh
so,
yeah, yeah.
that is
35%
something.
faster, right? This is the idea. Yeah, sorry.
Yes. No, no, please go on. I'd love to have you share your take on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this is something we have recently started doing with customers directly as Lemongrass. So I'm not surprised to see this more widely in the market and from SAP directly. But the idea that you can use agents and AI and newer technologies to be able to speed up migrations, I think we see AWS do it last year with .NET applications and mainframes, where it's a black box. You stick it in one end, it comes out the other side on AWS. I'm unsurprised to see SAP adopt similar technologies and radically speed up and presumably reduce cost of these migration processes that historically, despite using SAP tools end to end, have been fairly manual. So yeah, it was. I think it's really welcome. A lot of customers, I think, will find it now easier to make the transformation steps that they've been holding back on, as it's quicker and faster and cheaper to do it. I welcome seeing SAP use AI for both transformation as well as for end state business outcomes.
Yeah, yeah, completely agree. I mean, the way that I've framed it in the past is, let's call it, still 70% of the SAP customer base, at least in terms of large enterprise, has not gone RISE yet, has not necessarily gotten on a clear path to S4, to modernization. This is something that we as an organization are constantly focused on. And so I love to see SAP circling back and starting to address those challenges more, and honestly creating a more holistic framework at the assistant level. If you think about the assistants agent kind of hierarchy that SAP has put forth, that I think is great scaffolding that then partners like ourselves can continue to fill in the gaps and try and make this more concrete, more tangible, more approachable to customers today, as they think about what that looks like, what best practices are, how fast can you actually go as you think about the motion towards RISE and towards the autonomous enterprise.
100%. So let's quickly wrap this up, because I think we're running out of our allocated time. But if you were to pick a couple of things customers should now be doing in the next 12 months off the back of Sapphire, what would your call out to customers be?
I mean, I think the message that we've been putting out for quite some time around BTP, BDC, this is the foundation. This is the layer of your infrastructure that will ultimately manage and inject context into the agentic layer. That is paramount. That is a parallel work stream that should be getting full attention from everyone right now. And then I think above and beyond that, starting to think about the orchestration layer, starting to think about how you can build purpose-built narrow solutions that then can become more tightly coupled to the orchestration layer, to the assistant layer, to the engagement layer. I think that is now the architecture to start thinking more about. And then for customers who haven't gone RISE yet, thinking about what those migration assistants look like, how you can leverage that, how you can start to plan around that, how you can start to coordinate with partners in terms of filling in your gaps. I think those are kind of the three main areas from my perspective that customers should start paying more attention to. How about yourself?
For me, it's about not waiting. So what I heard a lot of customers say is they were waiting for Sapphire to be over to sign their EA agreement, to be able to start refactoring on DataSphere, to be able to start building their agentic solutions. Now Sapphire is over. I think the same people are saying, oh, I'm going to wait for SAP to release this agent in Q3 or whatever it might be. There is huge value in deploying some of these new technologies, not only from the classic ways in which we reduce costs, but also in new markets. You can discover new ways you can generate revenue, new things you can do with your organization. And the cost of doing them has become a lot cheaper and faster than it used to be, specifically because of these technologies that are enabling migrations to go 35% faster. And that's not just like a random number. We're seeing that already in the field. So my message to customers is there is enormous value to be delivered in IT now, right now. And if you wait, your competitors are going to do it before you do. So stop waiting and start transforming, because it's never been a better time to start. That's my message. All right. Well, thank you for joining us for this Lemongrass podcast. It's been lovely to have you all, and I look forward to speaking to some of you in future. And goodbye then from both Brian and myself. Thanks so much, everybody.